Order, order. Stephen Mosley.
Thank you, Mrs. Reardon. In March of this year, a constituent of mine, 24-year-old Rebecca Coriam, disappeared whilst working for a British employment agency on a Bahamian-registered, American-based Disney cruise ship in international waters off the coast of Mexico. Rebecca was living her dream, working as a member of the youth staff on the cruise ship Disney Wonder. The Disney Wonder was cruising out of Los Angeles on a 7-day cruise along the Mexican coast. Rebecca was last seen just before dawn on the 22nd of March. She failed to report to work at 9 a.m. and the alarm was raised shortly afterwards. The crew initiated a search of the ship and she was listed as missing at sea. Whilst the Disney Wonder sailed on to her next destination, the Mexican Coast Guard searched the waters behind the ship and found nothing. The Disney Wonder is registered in the Bahamas, and under international maritime law, it is the responsibility of the Bahamas Maritime Authority to investigate Rebecca's disappearance. Despite an ongoing investigation of over 7 months, Rebecca's family are still awaiting news of what happened to their daughter. The reason for calling this debate is in recognition that whilst international maritime law requires that cruise ships take every possible measure to provide safe passage, those measures are often ambiguous, incorporated into UK and international law through a variety of legislation, and that when something does go wrong at sea, it is frequently impossible to establish responsibility and ensure a thorough investigation. Victims are often left without protection, without support, and with little prospect of securing justice. Cruising is now one of Britain's favourite holidays, with around 1 in 9 package holidays being cruise vacations. The number of people cruising has doubled in the past 10 years, with around 1.62 million British people cruising last year. And despite the global recession, the UK cruise industry expects there to reach 2 million passengers by 2014. And cruising also has a massive beneficial effect of bringing tourists to the UK. In 2010, a record 116 ships visited 47 UK ports from 53 different cruise lines, bringing 541 visitors to the UK. And these figures are more than double those recorded as recently as in 2003. But how many of those holidaymakers, passengers and crew realise that if something goes wrong on their ship, they may be almost totally unprotected? The first obstacle that one encounters with incidents at sea is that national jurisdiction only extends so far beyond the nation's border. Once a ship is more than 24 miles from any coastline, it is on the high seas in international waters, and the law of that ship is then the law of the country whose flag it flies, and responsibility for crimes on board that ship lie with the legal authority of that country. And this in itself creates a number of problems. Because to avoid stringent safety rules and regulations, and also for tax purposes, many cruise companies register their ships in countries with little affiliation to the actual operation of their company. Take, for example, 9 of probably the largest cruise companies that operate in the UK that regularly carry hundreds of thousands of British citizens every year. Of their total fleet of 93 cruise ships, 42 are registered in the Bahamas, 25 are registered in Bermuda, 15 are registered in Panama, 4 are registered in Malta, 1 in Cyprus, 1 in Italy, 1 in Ecuador, 1 in Liberia, and as for the remaining 3 ships, I couldn't actually track down what country they are registered in when I was preparing for this debate. In Rebecca's case, the Disney Wonder cruise ship was registered in the Bahamas, and if I briefly describe to you the investigation that took place into Rebecca's disappearance, I think it will become obvious why I hold serious concerns about the protection of British citizens whilst at sea. One officer from the Bahamas Maritime Authority boarded the ship. One officer, 3 days after Rebecca's disappearance, for a ship with a capacity of 2,700 passengers and 950 crew. Little formal questioning of the ship's crew or passengers occurred. Little effort was made to gather or to secure evidence, and little, if any, forensic investigation took place on board the ship. After 7 months, Rebecca's family are still awaiting news of what happened to their daughter. How could we have allowed this to happen to a British citizen? We have the disappearance of a young English woman hired by an English corporation to sail on a cruise ship out of a US port, and yet not a single British or American police or forensic team went on board the cruise ship in the days following her disappearance. Contrary to this pitiful investigation, however, the Foreign and Commonwealth Office's website, under the section Travelling and Living Abroad, Cruise Ship Passengers, states the following: significant crimes against British nationals on any ship can, in certain circumstances, be reported to UK police and may be investigated even though they occurred outside the territory of the UK. A crime may also be reported to the authorities in the port or country in which a ship was docked or was headed when the crime was committed, with the result that local law enforcement agencies may also be involved in the investigation. Yet just one officer from an authority internationally recognised as almost toothless investigated the disappearance of a British citizen. In my opinion, this is appalling. Mrs. Reardon, I myself am an enthusiastic cruiser, and I do not stand here today with the intention of berating the British cruise industry, but I like to think of myself as someone who pays attention to detail when taking my family abroad. And yet, before I had been approached by the Coriam family in March of this year, I had no idea that if anything happened to me or to my family on board a cruise ship, the UK authorities, or even the authorities in the countries we were visiting, would be impotent in trying to help me seek justice. The Minister must acknowledge that the risks associated with the practice of flagging ships in obscure countries such as the Bahamas, Panama, Liberia or Ecuador are unknown to the vast majority of those 1.6 million British citizens who cruise each year. Passengers must be made aware of the jurisdiction that they will be sailing under before they book a cruise holiday, and they must be made aware of the potential downsides of sailing under a flag of convenience. If you go on holiday to the Bahamas, if something happens to you, you do expect it to be investigated by the Bahamian police. If you were to fly from London to Hong Kong in an aircraft, you would quite rightly not expect the Bahamian police to investigate a crime that happened on board. For crimes in the air, because of the Tokyo Convention of 1963, the country of landing has jurisdiction. Similarly, if you go on a cruise ship owned by a US company sailing along off the coast of Mexico, you do not expect to be totally reliant upon the Bahamian police. If airlines can sort out the problem of jurisdiction, which they do through the Tokyo Convention of 1963, why can't cruise ships? Rebecca's case highlights the urgent need for greater clarity of jurisdiction if we are to sufficiently and swiftly seek justice on behalf of British citizens. I should make it clear that it's not just cases of missing people that must be considered when discussing crimes at sea. Violence, theft and sexual assault also occur on cruise liners, and investigations are often just as fruitless as in cases of missing persons. There are no centrally collated records of crimes at sea. In fact, many cruise ships are not even required to keep their own logbook of incidents on board. It is not unsurprising that the cruise ships and cruise companies themselves do not publish a number of offences that occur on board, and it is only through trawling through international records, news reports and from contacts with victims and their families that campaign groups like the International Cruise Victims Association or Victim Support are able to collate figures. The International Cruise Victims Association states that at least 165 people have gone missing at sea since 1995, with at least 19 so far this year alone. Sexual crime on board cruise ships is also a problem. Incidents of sexual assault and sexual victimisation are significantly more common on board cruise ships than on land. The South Florida newspaper, the Sun Sentinel, obtained copies of reports filed to the FBI of serious crimes on board cruise ships between December 2007 and October 2008. The sexual assault and sexual contact reports from just one ship, the Carnival Valor, which is registered in Panama, indicates the possible scale of the problem. On January the 15th, 2008, female passenger victim. On January the 21st, 2008, female passenger victim. On March the 6th, female passenger victim. March the 21st, 16-year-old female victim. March the 24th, female crew victim. June the 8th, female crew victim. June the 13th, 16-year-old female victim. September the 9th, female crew victim. September the 17th, 2008, female passenger victim. Just one ship, in less than 1 year, reported 9 sexual assaults and sexual contacts to the FBI. I believe that improving the prevention and investigation of crimes at sea needs a twofold approach, which includes a tightening of safety regulations governing cruise ships and also greater clarity of international cooperation when investigating crimes. In the United States, President Obama last year signed into law the Cruise Vessel Security and Safety Act 2010, which is designed to increase security, law enforcement and accountability on cruise ships in international waters and for ships that visit US ports. I would strongly encourage the Minister to consider implementing a similar act in the UK to bring together the variety of laws that currently govern cruise ships into one concise and comprehensive set of regulations would go some way to improving the safety of cruise ships. But that is only the tip of the iceberg. The Minister will doubtless, and totally correctly, tell us about the extremely high standards that pertain to ships flying the red ensign, and he would be totally right. But by the end of this year, there will be no cruise ships registered in the UK. The last 3 ships, the 3 Cunard Queens, re-registered in Bermuda in the past few days. He will also tell us about the high standards imposed on ships registered in Crown dependencies, and again he would be right on that too. And I'm sure he will also tell us about the high standards that the UK imposes on cruise ships that dock in the UK, and he will be right about that as well. However, the vast majority of British cruise passengers will sail on a ship registered in a different jurisdiction. That may be in the Bahamas or Panama or in Liberia, and the majority of British cruisers now sail from ports outside the UK, almost 1 million of them last year alone. When it comes to crime against British subjects on ships registered with a flag of convenience from ports outside the UK, those British nationals, like Rebecca, can be almost alone and unprotected if they are the victim of crime, and they may not even be aware of that until it is too late. It is vital that passengers be made aware of the jurisdiction they will be sailing under before they book a cruise holiday, and they must be made aware of the potential downsides of sailing under a flag of convenience. It is also imperative for the UK authorities to take greater responsibility for investigating crimes against UK nationals that occur on the high seas. I would encourage the Minister to work with colleagues in the Foreign and Commonwealth Office and coordinate with the International Maritime Organisation and with international law enforcement agencies such as Interpol to help synchronise a more coherent structure for criminal investigations in international waters and on ships flying flags of convenience. More needs to be done to safeguard British citizens on cruise ships, and I hope that the Minister and his department will take on board these concerns and ensure that action is taken to do just that. Thank you.
Minister.
Thank you very much, Mrs Reardon. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship this afternoon. I think it's the first time as a minister or any other capacity that I've served under your chairmanship, so honestly it is a pleasure. And can I pay tribute to my honourable friend, the Member of Parliament for Chester, for procuring the debate this afternoon. And I hope he would acknowledge that I've met with Rebecca's family and himself and there were promises made that I made in that meeting, which I will touch on in my response in a moment, which I've kept those promises and we will continue to do so. But right at the start, can I pay tribute to Rebecca's family? They have had a tragic loss, a loss which has been exacerbated by not knowing what has actually happened to Rebecca. But that hasn't stopped them campaigning for justice for Rebecca and for other victims, not only of cruise shipping, but also the maritime fleet as a whole. And I will, as my honourable friend touched on, because it would be only right and proper, highlight that cruising as a whole is a boom industry. Cruising as a whole is hugely popular. My honourable friend touched on the figures, 1.7 million Brits this year, 20 million around the world will cruise, the vast majority of them in safety, and I accept the point that my honourable friend was making, and that is due to rise, as my honourable friend said, to 2 million in the next 3 to 4 years. But that mustn't make us complacent. There are things that we have controls of as a nation, and there are things that we don't have controls of as a nation. And sadly, the Cunard have announced in the last couple of days that the 3 Queens have been reflagged away from the UK. There was a particular issue for cruise liners. I got married in an old-fashioned church, but these days people seem to want to get married in a myriad of different places, Mrs. Reardon, and people want to get married on cruise ships. And under British law, at the moment, you can't be married on a British cruise ship. I will change that legislation in the very near future, as soon as I get a slot in the legislative process. So you will be able to, you can be married not anywhere else in this country, but not on a British flag ship, which seems to be somewhat ludicrous. And it does affect them. There is also no doubt that the inherited mess I had to do with equality of pay and differential pay that the previous administration left me with infraction proceedings has meant that we are having some ships flag away. I think that's very sad, and I've done everything possible, but the blame for that sits firmly, in my opinion, with the RMC and the Nautilus Union that took the British government to the European Commission for not implementing the legislation, and they have now seen the error of their ways, I hope, because we're actually seeing British jobs going abroad, and British flagships going abroad. It is not, and I'm sure my honourable friend would agree with me, just an issue to do with cruise liners. There is an issue which I've been very conscious about to do with the merchant fleets around the world and serious crimes, and I think rape is one of the most serious crimes that we can think of, has taken place and has not clearly been investigated properly. And missing persons, like Rebecca, also haven't been investigated properly. And the simple truth of the matter is the country which this vessel was flagged to isn't physically capable of doing the sort of investigation that Rebecca's family and us as citizens would like to have happened. In saying that, they didn't do hardly anything, as far as I can work out, and it was very half-hearted. And it appears, and I'm sure Disney are very conscious of their image, that there was more interest in actually getting that ship back to sea than there was actually investigating the member of their crew that was missing. Now, I made, when we met with Rebecca's family, and I paid tribute to the dignity with that meeting took place, I made some promises as to what I could do immediately, and including writing to the Bahamian authorities, and asking them to inform me exactly where the investigation was going, but also looking at it to see if the Marine Accident Investigation Board could be whether we had the powers to actually register as an interested body, as a statutorily interested body. Well, we have done that, but I've also made instructions that in every case that the Marine, whereas the British citizen involved on any flagship anywhere in the world, that the Marine Accident Investigation Board will register their substantial interest in the accident. I think that's a significant move. It's not something that we probably were looking at doing, but I say openly that this particular case has allowed us to really open our eyes as a country and utilise the skills of the Marine Accident Investigation Board, which is world renowned in these particular incidents, of saying, well, is it right that if a British citizen just happens to be on holiday, as my friend alluded to, on a cruise liner, not on the beach, that they don't get the protection that we would expect from the British government? And I think that is absolutely right. We have also, been supportive of the Cheshire Police, who we also paid tribute to here, because they have picked up the mantle here and been heavily involved and frustrated by the way that the case has been handled, and we will continue to support them and through the Foreign Office in the ongoing investigations. But as my honourable friend knows, I attended last year the Red Ensign Conference in Jersey, and at that conference, which obviously I'm the Minister responsible for not only for the Red Ensign in the UK, but the Red Ensign in any of the Crown dependencies, I spoke and said that there is a detailed responsibility, a moral and ethical responsibility of flag states to take seriously their responsibilities for those that are on their flag ships. I don't think, to be honest, that has been highlighted in that sort of way, and I've continued to highlight it, which I'll allude to in a moment. But at that conference of the Red Ensign, the Crown dependencies, there was a senior police officer who was saying exactly what Rebecca's family and my honourable friend has also been saying, is that who takes responsibility for investigations when it's not on a flagship? And that is a really difficult one. And we have had lots and lots of meetings to do with where does this responsibility lie. And my honourable friend did allude a moment ago to the Americans and President Obama. Well, President Obama is in an interesting position like me, where even though I have a large amount of flagged vessels, I don't have any cruise ships now under me, and nor does President Obama. So when we're talking to the rest of the world in the international community about where we can go with joining the investigations up and being taken seriously, we have to be very careful that we're not preaching to people that actually we're not responsible in that same sort of way. And actually, I'm sure my honourable friend knows that the American flagged fleet is very, very small, so insignificant in world terms, which is unusual for such a huge nation. Why? Because America flagged off many, many years ago to Panama and the Marshall Islands for their own political reasons. Sure, it's their choice, but there is hardly any American flag. So within the arguments that, that we're out there, we mustn't be hypocritical and telling countries what they should do when actually we don't have responsibility for cruise. But it's much bigger, as I touched on earlier on in my comments. It's much bigger, Mrs. Reardon, than just the cruise liners. Because people feeling that they are safe on a ship, whether they're at work, at leisure, on a cruise liner, or on, frankly, a loose cargo freighter coming around the coast on a regular basis, is crucially important. And crucially important, and I'm going to be slightly sexist here, Ms. Reardon, for women. Because historically, women didn't serve on ships in the way they do today. But I've had the pleasure of presenting the Cadet of the Year award for the last 2 years. I've managed to survive that long in this job. And both to a lady. Each time the Merchant Navy Cadet of the Year has been a lady, which just shows you where this industry is going and the skills and expertise that women can bring into the industry. But at the same time, they need to be protected. And I sadly have seen instances on my own desk where a member of the crew, a female member of the crew, was raped. I don't think that anybody is going to dispute that she was raped. It wasn't investigated properly, and there was a suicide that followed. Now, that wasn't in our territorial waters, but that's not the point. The point is that these things are happening. And so, Mrs. Reardon, one of the things I did in promising Rebecca's family is that I would do everything I could. I would also go to the top as to international responsibility. And the top of that is the IMO, the International Maritime Organization, based just across the river in a Department of Transport building. I'm sure they love me to mention that for them. An IMO building, and that is the only United Nations property or establishment within the United Kingdom. And I went, and I initially wrote, as I promised, to the Secretary General, the outgoing Secretary General, not only detailing Rebecca's case, but the other cases that we've heard about and we knew about as well. I can say to the House today that I had a follow-up meeting with the Secretary-General and his officials and the incoming Secretary-General, because there's a new Secretary-General from Japan that takes over in the new year. And that meeting was very positive. Unlike the previous attempts by the US when they tried to get through, we appear to have started to pull together a consensus. And at the 89th International Maritime Organisation Safety Committee, they agreed guidelines previously, but what we're going to put down is actually a motion which I hope other member states will agree to, asking for the Security Council within the committee to actually formally look at this whole issue internationally. Now, this does not mean that this takes away in any shape or form the responsibilities of individual member states within their territorial waters. Of course it doesn't. And it doesn't take responsibility of individual flag states, which I'll come on to in a second, as to their individual responsibilities. But what it will start to do is have a correct procedure, I hope, for what happens on what we commonly call the high seas. Because what goes on the high seas is hugely important to Rebecca's family and other people that have had their lives destroyed in many ways by events. But I think the international community cannot ignore any longer their responsibility through the IMO for actually saying, how can we handle this better? How can we actually deal with this sort of incident better? If countries that are, for want of a better word, flags of convenience, cannot physically cope with the sort of investigations that they know are going to come down the line, because we know what these events sadly take place. These ships, Mrs. Reardon, are small towns. I mean, the largest has 7,000 guests and 2,000 crew. I mean, that's bigger than most of the towns that we represent in our constituencies. Certainly bigger than like 2 wards in my constituency, all on one ship. And when you have that cramming of people, you have, sadly, like in society today, good and bad people. And you have people that are going to go on holiday, perhaps like I did when I was a young man and saw in Benidorm in all those years ago. People come and you want to have a good time, but actually other people are spoiling it for you. And this happens. And there are criminals within our society, and I call them criminals because that's what they are. If you rape someone, you're a criminal. If you are involved in crime on a ship, no matter where it is in the world, you are a criminal. And so it's so important that we pull together how we can address what I think the crux of the argument that my honourable friend has put together is that where we don't have responsibility for the ship, but where the flagged nation also isn't capable of addressing their responsibility, how the international community pull together to actually address that. Now, we have some of the greatest police authorities in the world. I passionately believe that. And some of the APCO guidance which we have been able to share is best practice and is being used extensively around the world. But I also think, and my honourable friend will probably agree with me on this, that we need to name and shame some of the cruise operators that are not, for want of a better word, taking their responsibilities as carefully as they should. But we mustn't denigrate all ship companies. I have a cutting here, Mrs. Reardon, from the Evening Standard, where a P&O registered ship had a man overboard only the other night, in the middle of the Atlantic. A member of the passenger saw what they thought was someone in the water, in the middle of the Atlantic. They raised the alarm. The ship dispensed 3 lifeboats and many lifebuoys, did a complete U-turn in the middle of the Atlantic, and miracle of miracles, that man was pulled alive from the Atlantic. To me, P&O should be praised, particularly the captain of the Venturer, which was the ship, because they obviously had a best practice, a set of skills in place that should this sort of thing happen, then they respond. I can tell the House that I've had instances where ships have hit a trawler, a ship that hit a trawler in the English Channel where a fisherman died, and they knew they'd hit him and carried on. So there's the 2 extremes. within an industry which is expanding, not only in the cruise industry, but the size of ships which our ports are adapting to now, the sheer size of ships. The largest ship in the world, the Maersk, has a crew of 13 or 14. So how do they respond? How can they respond? But we mustn't take away in any shape or form the responsibilities of the person that I've not mentioned at all during my response, Mrs. Reardon, and that is the captain of the ship. Because a captain of a ship on the high seas is the person solely responsible. And if that ship is then flagged, the owners of that ship flag it with any country, whether it be the UK or not, then that country has responsibility. And then, of course, the international community have responsibility. And I think the promises I made to Rebecca's family in my office just a few weeks ago, we have fulfilled. We're not going to be complacent in any shape or form. We will push on. We have an IMO conference here in London later this month, where the British proposals, I hope, will be supported. There is indication that we are starting to get some support for them, so that we can show the rest of the world that, yet again, the UK is leading in safety on the high seas. Thank you very much, Mrs. Reardon.
Order, order.